We had an interesting Twitter conversation with New York Times columnist Peter Beinart. We don't see eye to eye, but that's exactly why we like having the conversation. In his recent column, Peter objected to U.S. secondary sanctions on Iran, saying it would harm civilians. But he recently wrote an entire book about how the world should put sanctions on Israel. Why the difference? Do Israeli civilians not also deserve protection? Is Israel, a democracy and U.S. ally, really a worse country than Iran, the world's largest state sponsor of global terrorism? Well, Peter said that he feels secondary sanctions can result in a denial of humanitarian goods in a way that regular sanctions do not. But is that really true? We looked into the question, what are secondary sanctions anyway? Here's what we learned. Say a country like the U.S. wants to pressure Iran to not go nuclear, but doesn't want to start a war. The U.S. can stop trading with Iran, which creates economic pressure. But if other countries still trade with Iran, then it won't make much difference. Iran will continue its nuclear project and will probably end up in a full-scale war. Nobody wants that. So instead, the U.S. might say that it will no longer trade with Iran and will also cut off any country that trades with Iran. So, for example, if the European Union continues to buy oil from Iran, then the U.S. would also stop trading with the EU. The result? Iran will end up cut off from most of the world and pressured to stop its nuclear project without starting a war. But are secondary sanctions really worse for civilians? We checked international law, and it turns out that all sanctions must allow for the flow of humanitarian goods, and it makes absolutely no difference whether they are primary sanctions or secondary. And the U.S. does indeed follow the law on this. On the other hand, BDS, the movement to put sanctions on Israel, is actually not designed in accordance with international law. It is specifically intended to harm civilians, and its founders even want to destroy Israel as a country.
Definitely, most definitely, we oppose a Jewish state in any part of Palestine. No Palestinian, rational Palestinian, not a sellout Palestinian, will ever accept a Jewish state in Palestine.
What do you think about sanctions on Iran? We don't agree with Peter, but we're glad we had the conversation. People should do more of that. We encourage you to read all sides of the debate, get all the data for yourself, and tell us what you think in the comments.